Welcome back to another episode of Breaking the Lens of Bias. My name is Kat Killian. Glad to be here with you today. Well, there's been a lot going on this past week, and it brings up a really great topic to look at today, and that's what is false equivalency? So, a simple way of looking at a false equivalency is stating that apples and oranges are the same. Okay, well, let's take a look at it a little bit closer. They're both fruit, correct? Yes, but they're very different. They grow in different ways, they have different taste. The way they make their seeds are different, the kinds of trees are different. You can't, and I'm not an expert at this, but at least as far as I know, you cannot cross an apple and an orange. But you can cross different kinds of apples and you can cross different kinds of oranges um, because they are similar. Oh, or another one is a gorilla is the same as an ape. Um, they're similar, but they're different. And I mean like a chimpanzee or something like that, rather than just an ape, because apes encompass the whole family. Um, so, so looking at that, how can we take this bias? Well, the first thing is that I tend to look at how I classify things. So oftentimes we say things. I want to eat some fruit. Um, well, there's lots of different kinds of fruits. Um, and for example, I despise grapefruit. It's gross to me. It's way too tart. I just don't like it. Um, there are people who love grapefruit. So if somebody if says I'd like some fruit and they bring me a grapefruit, I'm going to be very disappointed. So I have to break that down further and say, yeah, I'd like some fruit. Maybe some melons, or maybe some berries, or I'd like an apple or an orange, etc. So the overall classification as fruit is one thing, and then we go down into more specific types of fruits in fruit families, like melons and berries, um, and etc. So on and so forth. So you can't make a false equivalency by just saying, well, they're all fruits, so they're all the same. You have to look at the differences in particular cases, because as with most things in life, there is a little bit more complexity than we like to think about. And I'm going to share a great quote that I had downloaded. So excuse me while I pull it up on my phone. This is from my friends at Thinking is Power. If a complex issue seems simple to you, it's likely because there's a lot you don't know. I'd even posit that there's a lot you just didn't think about. And knowing requires some thinking, requires some analysis, requires a greater understanding than a simple answer a lot of times. And even in our fruit example, it's more complex than it seems. So, as we all know, this past week, President Trump was indicted on federal charges of espionage, obstruction of justice, I believe it was willful retention, unauthorized retention of documents. And so, in that, in those charges, there were some things that were going on that claims, and I'm not going to say, I'm going to reiterate what Jack Smith, the lead special counsel, said, was that anyone is, including President Trump, is innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. So an indictment means there has been sufficient evidence to bring forth a case that he may be guilty of this. And a lot of what has been happening has been a classification of, well, Hillary Clinton had her private email server. Um, Documents were found in Joe Biden's house and in his private office. Although they do not mention Vice President Pence also had some documents. The thing that is in all of those cases, and in Biden's case, it's still under investigation by a special counsel. So therefore, it is taken out of his hands. It is taken out of the Department of Justice that is under him. It's kind of an independent counsel that is really looking at this in order to uh, look at the problem without bias. And that's what the purpose of a special counsel is. So that case is still under investigation. But in the case of Hillary Clinton and in the case of Mike Pence, was there definitely some kind of issue that went on? Yes. Was it intentional? No. Was there obstruction of justice? No. When asked to turn over things or when those things were discovered, those things were turned over. And as far as we know, that is the same thing that happened with President Biden. Um, so there was no obstruction. There was cooperation. There was no ill intent. Um, and so, how is this equivalent to the indictment brought against our former president? And therein lies the case: is you have to look at the facts. The overall arching thing, the overall arching fruit, as it were, was yes, they had classified documents um, outside of class or situations where classified documents could be kept. Um, so if that is the standard of guilt, then all of them are guilty. But in our justice system and the way that we look at things, we look at intent. So that's where the situation gets a little bit more complicated. Um, and as it appears now, there is some intent by the indictment, and again, it has not been proven in a court of law, um, that there was intent there. There was obstruction of that. There was the mishandling of classified materials. There was, according to the indictment, some indication that there were. He had asked his lawyers to cover up evidence. There was an admittance on tape of him having that and showing that to people, but oh, you can't look at it. So there's some things going on, and none of that has happened in the case with Hillary Clinton and the server, as far as we know, with the items found in Joe Biden's residence, and same goes with Mike Pence. Um, Another false equivalency is that presidents have kept their papers. Um, and as I understand it, and this is perhaps something that's very important to look at, perhaps Congress should spend less time in doing false investigations and things like that, and more in fixing the system. This is my opinion here. How can these classified documents get out in the wild, as it were? What kinds of systems do we have in place to prevent that from happening? Perhaps that is something that needs to be reviewed and looked at and modified so that when a political candidate leaves office, either by retirement or by being elected out, that the integrity of these private documents are kept as they should be. Now, as I understand it, after these documents are reviewed by the National Archives, they determine what papers can go to the presidential libraries. So they are in the archives for a time being until they determine what is not classified and what can go. So as we know, in the modern era, presidents establish a presidential library. Here in Chicago, the Obama Library is being established. So we've got the Obama Library that's being established. The National Archives is going to allow those papers to go into that archive so that people wanting to research Obama's presidency will have access to those papers. Now, items that are not classified will go there. Things that are still classified. So if we had papers done about one of the things that was alleged that Trump had was things about war plans to go after Iraq, and how he would do that. So If those things were classified under Obama, I don't think at this point in time, it's still too recent, that those kinds of things would be declassified in order to put them in the presidential library. But again, I'm not an expert in that process. I have a very basic knowledge of it, but I do have some knowledge of it. And so when those are released and they have access to those papers again, the former presidents in this case, they are then made public. It's not a just a simple process. Well, I'm going to allow this to be public, and so I can keep it, kind of thing. It is there needs to be those things need to be kept for the public record, because the records that are created by our legislators, by our president, by the Supreme Court, those things are of public record, except if they have a classified designation. And that's mainly in order to keep us safe, to keep our allies safe, to keep those who, people who operate for us safe, our military, our spy network. We have a spy network. We have to figure out, get intelligence on what is happening. So those are the issues that are getting all complicated and getting all muddied by making this false equivalency that on one hand he's saying he didn't do anything and he's totally innocent, on the other hand he's making excuses. If you listen to his words, you're hearing that, so it's very confusing, first of all. And again, that's a tactic used to muddy the waters, making things confusing, sowing doubt, making multiple alleged intent and things like that. It's all muddying the waters. But as we look at the facts that we currently have at this point in time, there's a false equivalency there. Yes, although overall fruit is, people had classified documents that they shouldn't have had. The difference is in terms of intent, in terms of cooperation, in terms of whether or not any investigation has been obstructed. And in those other cases, thus at least thus far, there several have concluded. The ones that have not concluded, particularly against Biden, they there have not been any allegations of obstruction. So, how to look forward at this? Um, in the case of Trump, a grand jury was convened to look at the evidence to see if there is enough evidence. It wasn't just somebody making up stuff. It was a case being brought to a grand jury to say, is there a case based on this evidence to move forward? And that was determined yes. So, does that mean he is guilty? Absolutely not. As we determine guilt by a court of law. That is for a trial to go forward. So keeping in mind that he is innocent until proven guilty doesn't mean that we can't look at the evidence. It doesn't mean that we can't look at the false equivalency and make a judgment. You may be a great fan of his, a great supporter of his, but are you willing to look at the facts? Are you willing to look at the differences between his alleged conduct and the alleged conduct of others? Are you willing to let those be played out in a court of law as they will be done? Are you willing to allow the special counsel to move forward on in investigating President Biden? And so those are the things that I would ask anyone to do, whether you support him or whether you do not support him. If we are a country by laws and we want to live by those laws, I believe everyone should be held accountable to the law, whether or not you are the President of the United States or whether or not you are an 18-year-old kid doing something stupid. But again, it's all about what's going on here, and you have to look at all the facts of the case. There are, prosecutors make cases every day different because there are equivalencies, but if you look at it and make it just on a simple thing, you're probably most likely making a false equivalency because life is complicated. Things are complicated in life, and we must look at those things in a broader picture and take into account all the facts as we know them or we can discover them. So, I hope that helps give some clarity. I hope that as you go forward, remember these things rather than diving into what we think and may support our own biases, our other biases that we have. False equivalency can be a very dangerous one. So thank you for tuning in today. As always, I welcome comments, questions. If there's a particular topic that you'd like me to look at, please feel free to put so in the comments. And I look forward to seeing you next week. Have a great day. Bye.